This is Motorsport Radio.
1, 2, 3.
Join the conversation. Contact the show on Twitter, on Facebook, and on our website, Motorsport Radio.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Formula One show with Motorsport Radio. It is myself, Connor Jackson, and joining me tonight, as always, is my gallant friend, Joshua Harrison. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing very good, yes. It was a great race and I'm looking forward to dissecting it.
Indeed, we are talking about the Bahrain Grand Prix this week as we return from, I suppose, a small break we had, Josh, wasn't it? And yes, what a way to start the season. Start new regulations, new era, new everything, new same people. Unfortunately, but the one thing we did get was a new winner for the new era, and it's Charles Leclerc. Obviously, we've seen him on the top step before. We've seen him on the top step before for Ferrari, but not in a while. In fact, this is the first time they have won since the 2019 Singapore Grand Prix, where they did also get a 1-2. And same again, it was a 1-2 here today with them and with Leclerc and Sainz both occupying the top two steps of the podium, and it was Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes finishing third from teammate George Russell and Kevin Magnussen in P5 in the Haas. In terms of the big talking points of the race, though, there are quite a few, and I will briefly start by the most obvious talking point, Josh, which is the Ferraris themselves. New era, new regulations, and it's the Ferraris back on top. Is this 2000 all over again?
Well, it was very surprising. Obviously, he went in practice, and it's been the whole way through Bahrain. Ferraris were devastatingly quick. I couldn't believe it. They were setting lap times that, I mean, they was expected to be 5 to 7 seconds slower than last year's car. You know, yet Ferrari were lapping under 2 seconds slower than last year's car, despite the fact they've got the extra weight, the less aero, etc. So whatever Ferrari's been doing in their secret lab of theirs has not just worked, but I think has shocked a lot of people. I mean, yes, we've got another spoiled child on the grid rather than Max Verstappen. We've got Charles Leclerc, but to be fair, Ferrari is in everyone's hearts as a Formula One fan. And it's great to see them back again. It's great to hear the Italian national anthem back again. And we could see Ferrari battling for the championship this season.
Indeed, as you say, the speed was one of the bigger talking points from the weekend. It was for reference, by the way, it was a 1:30.5 that Leclerc's pole position time was, which compares to Verstappen's pole last year of a 1:28.9. So, as you say, 1.5 seconds he was only slower by. And considering how much we were talking about these cars being dramatically slower, that's really not that much difference at all for what are essentially quite heavier cars this year, the heaviest we've ever seen in Formula One. And the Ferraris have really nailed these new regulations. Obviously, they've been off the pace for a couple of years now, and to see them back on the top step is probably what a lot of people would really have liked. We do have a young driver, Josh, not anything else we're going to describe him as, but yes, the mercurial Charles Leclerc managed to win from pole position. Didn't quite lead every lap thanks to the pit stops, but talking of pit stops, we had quite a few of those throughout the race, and there was a whole new problem this year with teams trying to sort out the 18-inch tyres.
Yeah, it was kind of a strange one, because it seemed that the hard tyre was wearing quicker than the medium tyre, which was wearing about the same as the soft tyre. So people started on the soft, and then Mercedes was panicking because they weren't running very quickly. They went on to the hard, which then sort of fell apart almost instantly due to wear, which was sort of not what anyone expected. And then they went to mediums, and it seemed to go really well. A lot of teams went to the hard and then had to then jump back onto the mediums. It seemed the medium was the best tyre. And that was probably the most surprising of all, because last season, the amount of times we saw them starting on the soft and then jumping straight onto the hard, or starting on the hard and then jumping onto the soft at the end. You know, the hard was used so much last season. I think this season, the hard will not be used, or will be used very, very loosely, because as we saw in Bahrain, the hard had no pace, it had no grip, it was just terrible.
I am a little intrigued whether this is going to be a season-long problem or a Bahrain problem, because Formula 2, who also run the 18-inch tyres and who have been running the 18-inch tyres for 2 years at this point, they also had massive problems with the hards during their races. For those of you who didn't see the Formula 2 event, they might be aware of the exploits of I forget his first name, but the Red Bull Junior Iwasa, who managed to leap from last place to first at one point in the race, because he was the only one on hard tyres throughout most of his stint and carried on towards the end. However, other drivers who were switching onto the hards at their pit stop had no grip in their tyres, because they had nothing off the line. They were coming out of the pit box and immediately sliding off the track. And we saw this to almost comical effects in the middle of the Formula 2 race, with drivers just unable to get any sort of grip down. Yuri Vips sort of famously sort of dropped back about 3 positions after leaving the pit lane because he had no heat in his tyres. And so I don't know if that's a hard tyre problem with Bahrain, or whether that, as you say, is going to be a factor throughout the year, because we've never seen that usually from the Formula 2 guys. So I am a little intrigued whether this is a one-off race problem. But saying that, I don't know why any of the F1 teams appeared to notice the Formula 2 race earlier in the day when they had the hard tyre problems. So surely they must know there must have been a bit of overlap with heating the tyres up is obviously an issue. Let's not go on the hard tyres.
I mean, I suppose it was because in the sprint race, they didn't use the hard tyres in Formula 2, which is about the same time that Formula 1 would race. Whereas in the F2 feature race, when they did run the hards, it was obviously in the afternoon. The sun was beating down the track temperature was a lot higher. So maybe the F1 teams thought the hard tyre would work better in the slightly cooler conditions of the night time as the temperatures dropped. Maybe it would come into their operating window. But the worrying thing, I think, for both the tyre provider Pirelli and the F1 teams is that the F1 themselves are looking to take away tyre blankets. So the tyres will come out of the cars come out of the pit lane on tyres that are just room temperature degrees, which is almost half what they are now. So if they're struggling with grip coming out of the pit lane now because of the bigger rubber, imagine what they're going to be like with temperatures half that. And you think of the pit lanes like Dubai and Baku and Singapore, where they're really tight corners in there, Interlagos even. There's going to be, I reckon, it wouldn't surprise me if there's going to be a few pit lane accidents this season, with just people just unable to get around those tight corners on those pit lanes.
Dubai is probably an interesting one. He has Marina, considering it goes under a tunnel. If you crash in there, you basically block the whole pit lane. There's no way you can get around it. So that'd be an interesting one to look out for. But this is something the teams are going to have to be wary of. This isn't just a case of, quick in lap, change your tyres, quick out lap. You've really got to, manage yourself now. You've really got to be aware that a pit stop isn't just the 22 seconds lost in the pit lane. It's the extra 30 seconds you lose on the out lap because you're struggling to get the heat in the tyres. But of course, new era, new regulations, there's new things to deal with. And talking of new things to deal with, reliability was a problem we were thinking was going to be a major issue. And about halfway through the race, we were thinking, this is amazing. Everyone is still running. There's no retirements. It's a new era. Surely we can't get to an end of a race of a brand new era and not have any retirements. And then we had the 3 Red Bull powertrain issues. Now, I should stress that they were all separate issues. For example, Gasly, the first guy to go and who caused the late safety car, his problem was with the MG UK, and it basically overheated and melted with the pictures from that, so you could see the melting side pod of the car, and that's going to have to be completely taken out and changed. And that's a limited part, remember, so that's going to be very limited throughout the season and will probably cause him problems later on. Now he's effectively ruined one. And then we had the 2 issues for the Red Bull cars, which lost them the podium. Verstappen, on course for a P2 finish after a battle with Charles Leclerc in the middle of the race, had steering problems and then had a hydraulics problem. And as a result, he's forced to retire with 3 laps to go as his car basically grinds to a halt. and Perez does the same with 1 lap to go. The engine appears to lock up on the end of the first corner, spins, and he's out of the race. There's nothing he can do. The engine's seized. The Red Bull's initial assessment of this is that it's something to do with a spec part with the fuel pump that, as I said, for this year is a spec part, and as a result they were basically laying the blame at the door of whoever builds these spec parts, so the FIA basically, going, right, this is an issue, as it were, and why was it only affecting us, as it were. However, the alternative view of that I've seen some suggest online is that it's an issue with the fuel. There are new fuels for this year, the E10 fuels, and as a result, teams develop their own fuels. Red Bull have their own fuel that they developed, and they, for whatever reason, couldn't get the fuel to, fuel be pumped, as it's the fuel pump, to pump correctly into the engine in the last couple of laps, and thus it causes an engine failure. So that will be an interesting way to see where the blame lies with that, and whether they can have a fix going into Saudi Arabia. Perhaps more interesting with that is that Red Bull, because they did all those late updates with the side pods, remember, on the last day of testing, never did a full race simulation under the new car with all the new parts. They went into this race blind in terms of race long distance performance, and now that they've done one, or I suppose failed to do one, what data can they really take from that going into Saudi Arabia, and is that still a continued problem for them going forward?
Well, the biggest issue, obviously, Bahrain is unique. It's in a desert, so it's hot. It's sandy. The temperature drops very quickly as well under the lights. So the first 2 or 3 laps, you're looking at a 20-odd degree difference between that and the last few laps. Hence why we saw the Gasly MG UK unit and other engines struggle, and Verstappen was the most obvious one, where he struggled with brake temperature, not because brakes being too cold, but brakes being too hot. So there is that issue, and I think that issue is only to Bahrain. Maybe we might see it at Singapore, which is a lot harder on the brakes and a lot harder on the engines, and it's also a lot warmer and a lot humid because it's later on in the year. And maybe Austin, Texas could be another one pointed out, as well as the Hard Rock Grand Prix in Miami, because they will be nearing the summer, or in the summer, in Texas and in Florida, which is hot. So are these new cars susceptible to hot temperatures? If so, do the teams add more cooling to these races and then take it away for other races, or do the drivers just have to learn to drive around it? Because it seemed that Verstappen was the only one that really struggled with hot brakes, and that was it. None of the other teams really struggled with hot temperatures. It was just genuinely Verstappen driving, obviously, his way he drives. Maybe he drove it too hard, or is it that even though they've said that they can follow cars really closely, are they struggling to follow cars really closely?
I do see where you're going, Josh. I will sort of slightly correct you in that there was, I remember, one team radio in the race for Nico Hülkenberg, I believe, that where he was basically told by his team, do not come into the pit lane because you're too hot. And his rims were basically so hot that if he were to stop the car, it would be impossible to basically remove the tyres without them catching fire, which I thought was incredible, really. So keep going, mate. Keep driving. Cool them down. But you are right. Red Bull was sort of almost seemed unique with this problem, and cooling is perhaps one of the bigger buzzwords that we might see throughout the season. Mercedes famously have got this revolutionary no side pod design that basically limits their cooling a lot more than the other teams, and yet they're just about on top of the issue. However, whether this will be more of an issue later in the season when we have more hotter races will be interesting to see, in which case we could this could be again more advantage for the Ferrari, as they appear to be the only one without any sort of major cooling issues, really. But yeah, we'll have to see how it goes on that sense. In terms of Mercedes, though, I will move it on then to Mercedes themselves. Lewis Hamilton, third place in the race. Amusingly, the last time Ferrari had a 1-2 in Bahrain was in 2010. And who was third in that race? Lewis Hamilton. So nice little tie in there. Fernando Alonso won that race that day. He's we'll talk about him later. But in terms of Lewis Hamilton, though, he looked a little bit out of it for pretty much all the weekend. And for the whole Mercedes team seemed a little bit out of the running, to be honest, compared to the Red Bulls and the Ferraris. But there was late race pace in that Mercedes, and after the Red Bull closed up, the Gasly's fire, I should say, caused a safety car, all the cars bunched up, and Hamilton really did pressure Perez in those closing couple laps. So is there suggestion to say that in a safety car affected race, or in any other sort of topsy-turvy race, Mercedes still do have a chance of taking victory and podiums? It's just that the early race pace suggests that they need to play the long game.
I have a very out there theory, right? Which,
unlike you, but carry on.
Yeah, which is basically Mercedes, I think, were playing the long game, as in, you can't win the championship in the first race. So why push the cars to the limit on the first race, knowing that you've got potentially 23 races on the calendar and very limited engines, MGUK units, etc., where if you could, Hamilton could have absolutely caned that car around that track, kept up with Red Bulls, Ferraris, whatever, and then blown the engine or something. Suddenly, 10 races, 11 races down the line, he's sitting at the back of the grid with a grid penalty, when they could ease the car into the race, ease the car into performance, gradually stepping it up throughout the race.
I feel like this is a slight bit of a cope here, Josh, in that, I'm happy to accept that Hamilton wasn't going to cane his engine to the point of failure, and maybe there's a little bit of that going on, but you wouldn't do that to such an extent that you're effectively lost out to the two teams ahead of you, because that championship points he would have easily lost out. Had it not been for the Red Bull failure, he would have left this Grand Prix with 10 points. But
he'd have only left the Grand Prix 4 points behind Max Verstappen, who I think Mercedes still view as the main title contenders.
Do you not think Ferrari are a long-term title contender then?
I don't think they are. I think, yes, they won Bahrain very convincingly, but I'm not sure they have the car to win enough races to take the championship yet. They've got to prove themselves. Because the reason I'm saying this is, remember 2 years ago when Mercedes dominated Bahrain so convincingly, but they then struggled in a lot of the tighter, twistier circuits around Europe, and it was looking like they weren't going to win the championship until they went to the more open circuits at the end of the calendar. So, because you've got this tie-up when you're designing your car to cope with both the twisty circuits like, trying to think of one now,
Baku,
Silverstone, stuff like that, where you need high downforce, compared to Monza, Spa, where you don't need high downforce, where it's just go as fast as you can physically can. And Bahrain, to some extent, is a low downforce circuit. There's a lot of very fast sections and a lot of fast sweeping corners. So maybe Ferrari have the fast car, but how bad is the car going to be? Even when we get to Jeddah this Friday, how bad is the car really going to be? How bad's the car going to be when we get to something like Miami Grand Prix, which is looking like it's going to be quite a twisty street circuit? When we get to something like another twisty circuit, like Mexico, for example, Sao Paulo, Suzuka, Singapore especially, have Ferrari built a car to win at Monza? Rather than think that they could do enough to win the championship, but make sure the car can dominate at Monza? Or have they built a car that is genuinely fast?
I'm sure we'll find out in time, and I'm happy to accept that, as the season goes on, people will develop. But you've also got to remember we've got the new cost cap era coming in. So, fixes can't be immediate. We can't. The days of Mercedes spending millions and millions of dollars at a very routine problem to just fix it are gone. They've got to keep within some sort of research and development line. I'm happy to accept Ferrari aren't going to walk this championship. There is going to be competition for them. Red Bull definitely proved that in Bahrain, and Mercedes weren't a million miles away. So the possibility of a three-way fight is absolutely there. And Ferrari do have a habit of fudging it up in the latter half of the season. So that's a possibility. But yeah, I think Ferrari, you've got to consider them. Leclerc and Sainz, you've got to consider them candidates if you want to win the title. You can't just assume it's going to be Verstappen all the way.
I'm going to go even far further out and say that I actually see a four-way fight for the championship, including Haas.
All right, okay, that's a bit far even for me, my friend. But carry on, go on.
Right, the reason I'm saying this is through pre-season testing, Haas has been there, up there. Right? Yeah, they had a massive issue in the first day, and it messed them up through testing. But by the third day, that car had been dialed in, and that was fast, really fast. Practice 1, it was fast. Practice 2, it was fast. 3, and qualifying, both Haases were there or thereabouts in the high part of the top 10. Yeah, Schumacher struggled a bit with race pace, but I think that is more lack of experience of racing. Bearing in mind he spent all of last season at the back, moving out of the way for people.
Also, I think his race in Bahrain was a bit affected on the first lap when Ocon hit him and spun him, basically.
Yeah, so you can't take that away. But you take Magnussen, who was there the whole race behind Russell, and Mercedes weren't pulling away from Haas either. Haas was fast. But if Haas is genuinely, as they finished, the third car in the results, then that is some serious title contender. If they are the third car there and there, I mean, this could be just a one race wonder, and they go to the back. But I'm thinking so.
I don't think Haas are going to throw it away, but I think the idea of them fighting for wins at the very least is going to be a little bit far-fetched. I'm happy to accept. If you wanted me to put a bet on now, Josh, and you said, are Haas going to get a podium this season? I could probably say, sure, £10 bet there's going to be a radical race some point in the year. Ferraris and Red Bull's going to smash into each other, and we'll get a Haas on the podium. Happy to accept that. But would Haas realistically be fighting Red Bull and Ferrari? No, I can't see it, mate. I can't see it.
I mean, watching the Bahrain race, I thought the Mercedes engines weren't strong.
They weren't. No, you're right.
For whatever reason, they didn't look like they were turned all the way up. Now, whether they weren't turned all the way up because of the heat, that wasn't mentioned that much, granted, during the race, but whether that was an issue, and due to the no sideboards in Mercedes and all this sort of thing, they just told all the teams, right, turn your Mercedes engines down a bit just in case. We don't want to melt these engines. We don't want to ruin these engines. This is a first race, new regulations. Let's just get all our cars home. Let's turn the engines down to 80%. That way we know that's the baseline. That's where we can work from. That's what I think was happening. Whereas Ferrari engines and the Red Bull engine, they were being pushed arguably 100%. And Mercedes and Ferrari, it worked out, right? With the Haas and Ferrari being up there. And Red Bull, it didn't work out with it all going wrong. So whether Ferrari took the risk and went 100% and said, right, that's the line, we can't go higher than this, but we know we can go lower than this and it will still work, compared to Mercedes getting the baseline and knowing they can go higher. Again, that's another thing we'll have to wait and see. but I was very impressed with the Ferrari engines, which all looked astonishingly fast.
Indeed. And I will sort of skip. I will use that as a bit of a way to skip slightly in our schedule, Josh, and we'll talk about some of the Ferrari-powered cars. We'll talk a little bit about Magnussen's incredible 5th place, but also I wanted to touch on some points I think a lot of people haven't been talking about, which is the performance of Alfa Romeo and most notably their new driver, Zhou Guanyu, as we should be calling him, because surname, first name in Chinese writing customs. Zhou was I think it's fair to say, a bit of a pay driver coming into the season. I, for one, was a little bit critical of, having the third guy in Formula 2 step up and not the first or second, for obvious reasons. And I know our fellow co-host Ross, who cannot be here this weekend, has a lot to say about Oscar Piastri, I'm sure. But Guanyu Zhou, I think it's fair to say he did a very good job with that Alfa Romeo. He was consistent with his race, and he proved that there was a lot of speed in that Alfa Romeo, a lot more than we saw last year. And of course, Valtteri Bottas, in a new team, a new environment, again continuing to perform. He was alongside Hamilton in qualifying, which if you'd said that last year, I'd be like, well, of course he would have. But to have him alongside an Alfa Romeo in 2022, that's incredible. And again, he was, great result for him. He finished 6th on the road, I believe. So, after Kevin Magnussen bested the rest effectively, and was keeping Magnussen moderately honest throughout the latter half of the race. So Valtteri Bottas, is he again another one to keep an eye on in terms of the midfield runners? And when we're talking about best of the rest this season, behind the Mercedes, the Red Bulls, and the Ferraris, are we looking at a Ferrari fight between the Alfa Romeos and the Haas's?
Yeah, and I think again it's going to be for Alfa Romeo versus Haas to see who can pick up those victories when the lead runners have issues or penalties or just are generally not fast. Because, I mean, as you're saying, the Alfa Romeos, they were fast. It seems every Ferrari engine, again, but whether it was turned up, because obviously they can turn the modes of the engines up to whatever they like, but they've got to keep them at it. So whether, as I was saying, Mercedes is at sort of 60, 70% of what it can do, and Ferrari was at 100%, let's just see let's just see if we can do it, sort of thing. And that's why the Haas and Alfa Romeo were so fast, and why apart from Mercedes, all the Mercedes engines were basically at the back of the grid and quite a way off the pace. That's to be seen later on through the season. But yeah, I mean, taking it on the chin, Alfa Romeo and Haas, I think they are generally going to walk away from this going, that's way better than even we expected. I know Goppensteiner will never admit this, but I don't think I think if someone said to him, you're going to get a points finish in your first race with Magnussen, I think even Steiner would have gone, no chance.
I will say, though, is that, again, we're looking at this from first race bias, and there is a precedent for this, especially with Alfa Romeo, because remember, they are the Sauber outfit underneath the body, basically. Sauber, back in 2015, when I know we had the new regs coming in 2014, so it's not immediately the same, but in 2015 they had a new driver pair with Marcus Ericsson and Felipe Nasr, and in that first race in Australia they finished 5th and 8th, which is an incredible result, especially considering the 5th place driver from that race was Felipe Nasr, who was the rookie. The rookie finished 5th place in his first race, and we were all stunned back then. Oh my God, this is amazing! It's a new era for Sauber. Their young driver has come and really shone them up, type thing, and fantastic double points finish. Basically put them third in the championship after the first race. Again, same as Haas this time, and then they did an 8th and 10th place in China a couple of weeks later, and then for the rest of the season only once did they ever finish above 9th place after that point. And it was a pretty dreadful season for them as it went on, and they basically fell to 8th in the overall championship. So I want to praise the Alfa Romeo for what they did. However, that team, and to an extent with Haas as well, I don't want to look at that first result and go, this is it for the season, because there is a precedent in Formula One of first couple week bias before everyone, maybe as you say, Josh, turns the engines up or brings in new developments and new parts, and thus re-levels the playing field, as it were. So I want to praise Bottas and Magnussen for the job they've done, but I also want to say that I don't think it's going to be those two fighting it out for best of the rest behind the big three teams. The Alpine looks relatively quick, and I think they will definitely be up there, and I wouldn't be surprised to see McLaren get their act together in the next couple of weeks and start scoring more points. But to say it's going to be Magnussen versus Bottas for the rest of the season for that best of the rest spot, I want to say it's unlikely, because the other thing is they are the independent teams. While Alfa Romeo I know is a brand, they don't have as big an involvement as, say, Aston Martin does, who basically owns the team. Team Silverstone is Aston Martin at this point. Alfa Romeo is basically a title sponsor to the Sauber organisation, and as a result, we've got the two independent teams, as it were, up at the front, Haas and Alfa Romeo, the other independent team being Williams, of course. The rest of the manufacturers, I know it's a very broad term and I'm being a bit loose on this definition, I am aware, because McLaren and Aston Martin don't, run their own engines type thing. But the rest of the car companies, as it were, I would expect them to have a lot of pride, a lot of deals in place to ensure that they can develop themselves out of this hole quite successfully. But whether we can see Haas, have the know-how and the experience to develop their car throughout the season to keep up with the pace, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about that.
I mean, I know it's only the first race, but the biggest worry for me was Lance Stroll. And if anything, he was quite possibly the most disappointing driver on the whole grid, purely because Nico Hülkenberg has got into a brand new car and literally done nothing, done no testing or anything, and he was still able to beat Stroll. Stroll was at the back of the grid doing pretty much nothing all race. So, I mean, Aston Martin as a whole were, but we're talking about someone who isn't a rookie anymore. He's been racing for 5 seasons now, and you've got to wonder, is he only, probably you would say he is he only in that seat because his dad owns a team? And is it a good business idea to keep your son in a team, in a seat that that, for example, you could have Vettel and Hülkenberg in that seat for the season, and you'd do a lot better than Stroll and Vettel. True. Obviously, we do wish Vettel the best of luck, by the way, to get better. He was out this weekend with COVID, for those who didn't know. Hülkenberg did step into the seat and, as you say, rightfully outqualified him in a car he's had no testing in. There was a bit of a discrepancy in the race. Hülkenberg, as I mentioned earlier in the show, had a bit of brake issues, and as a result actually ended up finishing last overall. But throughout the majority of the race, him and Stroll weren't that far separated apart, and Hülkenberg was leading him for a considerable number of laps. Stroll, as you say, it's his 6th season now in the sport, and he's nowhere near a rookie. He's not really a young gun anymore. He has shown some flashes of brilliance, and I will say that about Stroll is if you look at, say, his podium record compared to other midfield drivers, he does have a habit of picking them up here and there. Azerbaijan, Italy, and Sakir. He's done it in the past. But I think, as you say, this weekend is notable because this is one of the circuits he's had those. And he's had one of those lucky podiums at, the Sakir Grand Prix, famously. He got 3rd place for the Racing Point team. He was nowhere this weekend. A circuit he supposedly likes, nowhere near the pace. And I think Aston Martin will be very concerned, not just with Stroll, but just as an organisation as a whole. Even if we assume Vettel was going to be faster than both of them, Stroll still finished the race in 12th. And he wasn't really in the contention of points all race. Aston Martin effectively leave
Bahrain as either the or the second slowest team in terms of ultimate lap pace, and for a team that was famous for overachieving with minimal money, they are now massively underachieving with exceptional money. And when you've got a situation like that you've got to look at the management structure. You've got to look at where the decisions are coming from and whether it's just a case of getting the new team embedded. And, they've got Martin Whitmarsh on board this year and Mike Crack coming over from the BMW Andretti team in Formula E. Very talented people in this team. Is it just a case of them needing to gel together and make a new car and, really drive the focus of the company forward? Because if it's like this pace for the rest of the season and it continues into next season, Lawrence is going to start questioning a lot of things, because this isn't the direction the team needs to be going in any way, shape or form, considering the amount of millions that have been put into it.
I mean, you ask any owner, you never employ your family, because they are almost impossible to get rid of. Because you can't go up, Lance Stroll can't go up to his son and go, sorry son, you're not good enough, I'm putting someone else in your seat. Because it's going to lead to a few awkward dinners, and it's going to whole family issue, and you don't want that in Formula One, which is so open. So every part of every driver's lives is scrutinised by the media. So it's going to be obvious if that happens. And I think there is an issue where he was Stroll was like, you know what, I'm going to put my son in, he's a good driver, he's doing all right, and he will help with ever someone there to help him get up high. Now, as you said, he's now in a 6th season. He's pushing, a good number of Grand Prix now. And apart from the odd podium, you'd sort of expect someone with that many Grand Prix to be doing quite a bit more than he is doing. And
but I could argue the same about Hülkenberg. How many podiums does Hülkenberg have to his name? How many seasons was he in Formula One?
Yeah, but how many full seasons has he been in Formula One?
Quite a few. I know there was a couple, he didn't do, but I think Hülkenberg did quite a few full seasons. But the big thing with Lance Stroll is that while he isn't quick, when he needs to turn up on a day, there will be days he turns up and does amazingly. His pole position at Turkey, I think, has to be the best example of that. He's not a consistent driver, though, and I think that's what we have to accept, is Lance will have an exceptional day. One day is going to be the best you've ever seen him, and then the rest of the season is going to be nothing. And if Aston Martin do struggle in the lower half, it's probably not that bad. As in terms of Lance's career, because it's not like he's under pressure. The real pressure will come if Lawrence succeeds in getting the team to do well and actually move towards the front of the grid, and whoever that lead driver is, whether it be Vettel or some other driver they employ in a few years' time, does he want Lance Stroll as a teammate, as a secondary, if you're pushing then for the race wins and pushing then for potential championships 4 or 5 years down the line? Do you want Stroll as your second driver?
I mean, the pressure's going to step up if Vettel comes in, say, this weekend and gets a top 10 finish, and then 4 or 5 races down the line, Vettel's had consistently 8th, 9th places, and Stroll is still hovering around 12th, 13th place. Bearing in mind that you can't use the excuse that Stroll is basically a rookie anymore. What it should be like Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon. It's now been, where they are literally together, because Vettel's got a lot more experience, but Vettel's also older. So with experience comes age, and with age comes less fitness and all this sort of thing. Like Hamilton and Russell. Russell's come in and he finished behind Hamilton, which is where you'd sort of expect him. But if we'd be doing the same thing with Mercedes if Russell finished in 11th position and Hamilton finished in 3rd. Teams should be 1 or 2 places away from each other unless there's an engine issue. That's how every team should be. Okay? The fact that this wasn't really the case at Aston Martin and hasn't been the case at Aston Martin for a number of years, surely has to be raising a lot of concerns with Stroll as to the performance and how he wants. I mean, he might want that way, where he has one driver going for podiums every race and doing really well, and the other driver being his son. Maybe he wants that, but that's not a good business setup if that is the case.
And I know the one thing I brought up in the show notes, Josh, that I wanted to discuss was Aston Martin's employment of Hülkenberg as a stand-in driver. Now, there have been 5 occasions since COVID started that a driver has had to miss a race because of COVID. Of these, 3 of them have been due to Team Silverstone, all of which Hülkenberg has stepped in for, which is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. Hülkenberg is the super sub of the series. However, if you've got a team such as Aston Martin who are looking to push forward, is it wise for them to get a young driver involved? If you want to be a front-running team in the future, is it worth looking at Formula 2, Formula 3, and getting one of those drivers to be a junior driver for yourself? And so when you do have these one-off occasions where, oh no, Stroll's got COVID again, you can have them step up to the race seat, and not for a full season, but just for a one-off race like Hülkenberg's doing, prove themselves. And if they can prove themselves, it gives Aston Martin another option then for a season to come, because at the minute they're in a very everything is fine type of attitude of, well, we've got Vettel, he's not going to age that much, trust us. Stroll, he's fine, I guess. And then Hülkenberg as a reserve, again, he's not going to age that much, trust us. But all these drivers aren't, they're not young drivers anymore. There isn't really a young driver in the Aston Martin lineup. They're all experienced campaigners. And while obviously there's plenty to be said about having experienced campaigners in your team, to not have any youngsters on your books, that's surely got to be an issue for them. Do they start bringing in Mercedes young drivers? Do they start making a deal with Mercedes, or alternatively, do they start employing some youngsters of their own? What can Aston Martin do to secure themselves in a 5-year future, Josh?
I mean, it's a massive concern, because obviously you look at Red Bull, Mercedes, all of these teams, they've got the youngsters who sit for hundreds and hundreds of hours on the sim, toning in setups, getting cars ready, helping them out, and occasionally doing track work. Aston Martin don't have that. So surely that is going to really, really hamper them when it comes to race weekends. Because who's going to do the sim work? You can't expect Lance Stroll to literally be doing sim work and Formula 1 work at the same time. It doesn't work. So whereas like Williams has Roy Nissany on their books, doing all the sim work while, Latifi and Albon's out doing the race work. Aston Martin doesn't have that. Aston Martin is as big as, I'd say, Alpine, maybe as big as Mercedes, even though maybe not quite that big. But to not have a youth academy, a youth ladder is, I think, massively worrying, because the likelihood of Vettel continuing on next season is unlikely. So they're going to be a hole. So who are they going to bring in? Are they just going to get a random youngster from Formula 2 and go, yeah, you'll do, bang? Or as you said, common sense would be to sign up to either a Red Bull or a Mercedes driver academy and go, look, okay, we will take one of these youngsters, put him in the sim, occasionally do P3 work, just let him drive a Mercedes-ish car for you, and I'm sure Mercedes would snap at the chance. But I think Stroll is sitting there going, well, we're our own team. I've got my business plan. It's working really well. How much of the future is he looking at? Is he looking at thinking, going, well, after this season, I might sell?
That's an interesting shout, Josh. I can't imagine Lawrence would do that. But you're right. There isn't a lot of apparent forward planning in terms of the drivers in that team. What I thought most notable in the lead up to the weekend, Daniel Ricciardo, as we're aware, was out preseason testing at Bahrain because he had COVID. And during this time, after the end of testing, Alpine did an announcement, which is that they would be happy to release Oscar Piastri, their junior driver, to let him race for McLaren if McLaren needed him. Now, Alpine and McLaren have no connection. There's not an engine supplier there. There's no overlap of cross. They were simply doing that as a way to give their young driver an opportunity. However, when Aston Martin's driver dropped out because of that, Alpine didn't continue that offer, as it were, from Piastri to Aston Martin. They weren't prepared to give their driver over to Aston. Now, I don't know whether that's got something to do with Alpine and the Renault organisation themselves and their relationship with Aston Martin. But, you know, if you've already offered a youngster to one of your rivals, why wouldn't you offer him to another of your rivals unless that says something about how Aston Martin is run and how the other teams treat them in the paddock?
I think there's a little bit where I think Alpine know McLaren aren't their rivals. I think Alpine expect McLaren to be Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes rivals, whereas Alpine still expect to be lower half of the top 10, where Aston Martin are. And I think giving your youngster to Aston Martin, who is your direct rival, to help them out, I think is too much.
Okay, fine. Fair shout.
Giving your young driver to McLaren, who you know have got a very good car, probably a better car than you have, you know, will forward their development. But why would you give Oscar Piastri to Aston Martin, who have a similar car to Alpine, if not even worse car? Okay,
fair shout, and I'll hold back on that one, Josh. Speaking of McLaren, though, excellent segue onto what we were discussing before the show, Josh, which is McLaren again have dropped the ball when it comes to new regulations. It's like 2014 all over again when they went to the Honda engines. And I remember how enthusiastic Fernando Alonso was going to that team and how it was going to be the start of a brand new era and it was going to be fantastic and he was going to start to win world titles again. And here we are. Now, it may just be a one-off bad weekend for McLaren. After all, their pace at Barcelona in the pre-season shakedowns sort of suggested that the car had quite a lot of underlying speed, and they were the first team to effectively fix porpoising. But they had massive brake issues that weren't barely sorted by the time the race came around. Norris did a whole week of testing. Ricciardo had no testing, and it's resulted in a McLaren team that got no points and struggled to such an extent where they've left, they were going to leave Bahrain as the worst team. And as we now know, Red Bull had that double engine failure and they've left technically as the worst team. But McLaren still only got 14th and 15th with both drivers. That's terrible when you consider only 17 cars finished the race. And it's not anywhere McLaren would have wanted to be. And while I know Ricciardo did beat Norris right at the end of the race, for most of the race, Norris was in front of Ricciardo. Those two, though, they can't be happy with this situation. And especially for Ricciardo, he knows his years are numbered. You know, what is he going to take away from this weekend?
I'm thinking that with the new regulations, with the more electronics in the engine, it's a bigger hybrid system. I'm wondering if some of the teams have gone for smaller brakes in the fact that they know they could use the engine to slow the car down a lot better. There's more aerodynamics on the car, which should drag the car, slow the car down a little bit more. And all this. And I think there's a lot of teams that have actually underestimated how little brakes are needed. So like McLaren and maybe Red Bull even, they have developed brakes that are, say, X sized, when actually they need brakes that are Y sized. And as a result, Bahrain, maybe Jeddah might also be an issue. I can't remember exactly Jeddah being too much of a braking circuit. But especially, again, when we come to some of the big big circuits that need a lot of brakes, if they have generally underestimated the size of the brakes needed for the weight of the car, that's a major oversight for some of the teams. And when you consider the teams that struggled with brakes is Red Bull and McLaren and Aston Martin to some extent, that's three big teams that have underestimated these brakes. That's a huge title shake-up, and especially for Red Bull, that's huge ramifications if they have generally made that error.
Indeed. Just sticking with McLaren for a minute, Josh. Considering what they have gone through in 2014 with their massive problems and how they basically didn't accept their own failures for a number of years and blamed it all on the Honda engines, which pushed back their review of their own car to realise that it was actually their own car that was a problem and not just the Honda engines. Will they have learned from that now? Is Zak Brown enough of an astute owner to go, well, look, guys, we've been here before, let's not make the same mistake 2 times in a row, and really focus in on the problems, make sure it's fixed, and even if they can't fight for the title anymore this year, maybe these issues are so bad that they've ruined their title chances, but if they can get back to, say, the fight for 4th, is that something McLaren can do by the end of the season, or is this proof they're doomed already? Are we speaking too early, or are we making astute assumptions?
Well, as I said, if it is the brake issues, I don't know if they can get them sorted, because with the cost cap, with what they can and can't change, and all these new restrictions coming in to stop this, brakes are a huge part to redevelop. And if you're seeing like Aston Martin, McLaren and Red Bull really struggling with brakes temperature because the brakes aren't that good. I mean, Ricciardo was saying that the car is running on. Verstappen was saying that the car is running on, which is basically where the car isn't slowing down. That seems to me like they are relying on the electronics in the engine to slow the car down, not the brakes, which makes me again think that they have developed the brakes to be X-sized when maybe they need to be Y-sized. And maybe McLaren, on the other hand, has gone for, right, okay, we're going to go for braking with a brake, brakes on the wheel. With the old cars, they had really small brakes, if you remember rightly, and they did struggle with overheating. Bigger wheels, you'd expect bigger brakes, but maybe some teams have gone for the same sized brakes. When you consider the extra weight the cars have, especially at the start, how that's not going to be fixed overnight. That's going to be a major redevelopment, and that's going to cost a lot of money to redevelop. And are teams able to? Will teams ever be able to redevelop that, or will they just generally have to work a way around that issue?
I guess we'll find out and see, as it were. If I remember back to the launches of the car, Josh, I remember McLaren were the only team to, I think someone else did, but they were definitely the first team to introduce pushrod suspension, where everyone else was doing pull rod suspensions on their cars when they did the launch design, and that was something very radical that a lot of people thought that would affect them. And perhaps some of this braking issue is related to the fact they have got this pull rod suspension as opposed to what every other team is doing. But again, I'm sure we'll have the technical analysis to see that in time. Josh, I just wanted, as we're starting to come towards the conclusion of the show, I wanted to come on to one major talking point that we were all talking about before this race weekend, which is, have we got better racing? It's it's a case of, we came into this new regs, the whole point of these was that it was going to reduce overheating of the cars when they were following. Cars could follow each other closer for longer, and we would end up in a situation where cars would be battling it out left, right and centre throughout the whole field. And I want to say, as a cautious optimism, yes, we got that. What do you think, Josh?
I mean, I feel a bit silly because after watching Formula 2, I thought we will see that again in Formula 1, right? I genuinely thought we'd have 8 or 9 people battling for the lead. It'd be huge packs. And I was thinking, I'm really excited for it. And when I watched it, I was like, actually, that's a really stupid thing to think of. You know, they're not all using the same car. They've all got different stages of development. Of course, we're not going to have 9 or 10 cars following each other within a second and no big gaps. But at the same time, we did see for most of the first part of the race, 4 or 5 cars following very closely. I mean, Hamilton was up behind, I believe, was it Verstappen for quite a while, where he wasn't, or was it Magnussen? He was behind someone for a good couple of laps. Less than a second. Yeah, it was Verstappen. Less than a second behind. No, it was Perez. That was it. He was behind Perez for about 6 or 7 laps in DRS range. But there was no, Bono, my tyres are shot, or there was no visions of him dropping back to save his engine. It seemed that the car looked genuinely good, 0.6, 0.7 seconds behind the other drivers. But what I did notice, DRS was pants. Now, they did say that DRS would be less impactful this season, but I think they might have gone too far the other way. Because we were seeing, again, with Hamilton, he was 0.4 seconds behind Perez coming out the final corner. With DRS open, Hamilton was barely able to pull alongside Perez. Maybe that's some Mercedes power struggle thing. But if it's not, for the extra 15 mile an hour that you get from DRS, meaning that you still can't pass the car, that's not looking good for overtaking. If they've made DRS so inactive that it doesn't work anymore.
I think you've got to look at some of the engines with that, because if you looked at, say, when Verstappen was closing on Leclerc for the lead of the race, that Red Bull was fast in a straight line. Like, nothing to take away from Hamilton, obviously, but Perez would have been fast in that Red Bull in a straight line, even with the DRS assistance from Mercedes. I can understand kind of why he was a bit slow, but of course, again, this all could be very much track focused. We haven't really got any proper data outside of the little bit of running they did in Barcelona with battling, and of course here in Bahrain. Saudi, I think, will be a lot more interesting because there's only one real proper straight in Saudi Arabia. Like, in terms of overtaking points, there's only 1, maybe 2 classical overtaking points in Saudi Arabia. The rest is very high speed all the time, and we saw that last year during the race. Everyone was lining up for basically the turn 1 overtake, and if you didn't do it there, well, tough shit, you just follow him for the rest of the lap. It was very interesting to see how DRS wasn't as effective. But surely, Josh, you don't want DRS to be effective. The whole point of having DRS was it was a crutch for Formula One to be on because they couldn't get drivers to race wheel to wheel anymore, and it was a way of increasing overtaking. If you developed a formula in which it's easier for the cars to follow and thus easier for them to battle with each other, then the whole point is to reduce DRS to the point you don't need it.
See, yeah, there is that. I mean, part of me is like, well, why don't they just do it where you DRS to get alongside the car? Once you're alongside, your DRS then closes, so you lose that advantage, and then it is a battle between the 2 cars. But at the same time, DRS meant we had great races because of DRS. To then make the cars arguably better.
Yeah, but we had great races before DRS existed as well. It's not like DRS created racing.
But if you think about it, if you take away DRS now, all right, there won't be any overtakes because, all the cars would just sit behind each other, slipstream, and then as they'd pull out, the true speed would be exposed and no overtaking. So DRS has to work. But they have reduced it so much, I think, that with Max Verstappen, he was again, I'll go back to the brake issue. You could see he really struggled to slow the car down, which is obviously a sign that the brakes were not very good. So that will be an issue later on, obviously. But with Hamilton and Perez, yeah, it could be down to his speed. I mean, when Hamilton came up behind Magnussen, he seemed to have the same issue where he could get close to Magnussen, but when DRS would come on, he'd get close, he'd pull out, but he would really struggle to pull alongside. Is Mercedes down power, or is there maybe a side draft issue that the regulations didn't foresee? Because the air's got to go somewhere, and if it's going up, it might also be going outwards. In which case, if you pull out to overtake a car, you're getting this dirty, turbulent air that you would normally get alongside, which would then slow your car, buffet your car around, and then maybe even disrupt your braking, which is why we saw so many lockups from DRS.
In that case, could that be a Mercedes only issue then? Because after all, Mercedes are the only ones without side pods, and is that shape of the unique shape of the Mercedes car an issue when it comes to overtaking?
Well, but we saw Verstappen struggle many times trying to overtake Leclerc. Every time he'd end up going deep. But
he still overtook Leclerc though, didn't he?
Yeah. But could that be because of the dirt? But could the dirty air that's being protruded out sideways from the cars be making the drivers struggle overtaking and then braking in that dirty air where you're not getting the downforce to slow the car down? That I might be making it. I might be, not even saying anything true. But could that be something that maybe they didn't foresee in the regulations, where the dirty air has to go somewhere, and it won't just go up; it will have to go elsewhere. So if it doesn't go flat off the back of the rear wing like it used to, surely then it has to go sideways. So if you're pulling out into what is this dirty, turbulent air, which is going to buffet your car along coming into the braking zones. When you hit the brakes, you're not going to have that downforce that we saw last year when the cars were behind each other. And could we see a lot of these DRS zones into braking zones cause major issues in outbraking your opponent?
I guess we'll see. Josh, I'm aware, coming nicely, as it were, to the end of the show, and so I wanted to do a small game with you before we finish. It's going to be quick fire questions, okay? As I always get slightly annoyed whenever we do these shows, and there's always one team we don't mention or one driver we don't mention. I'm going to go through each of the 10 teams so that we can definitely say that we've mentioned each team at least once today. And I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it in sort of 10 seconds or less, as it were. So no long-winded answers here, my friend, okay?
Cool. Let's do it.
Okay, so Ferrari's question. Is Sainz out of the running for the championship immediately, or is it Leclerc's to lose?
It's Leclerc's to lose.
Red Bull, do we think Perez can match it with Verstappen throughout the year?
Yes.
At Mercedes, do you think we'll be reintroducing the side pods if the design is going to be reintroduced?
For certain tracks.
Interesting. Okay. Haas, best weekend of their, I suppose, career for them, as it were. How many more times are we going to see them in the points? Regularly, or is this a flash in the pan?
I reckon 75% of the races.
75. Wow, that's a margin, as it were. Who else do we have? We had Alpine. We didn't mention them much today. Ocon and Alonso both very close to each other throughout all of the race. Not really much separating them. Is that suggesting that is the absolute limit of the car, and both of them are pushing it to the max?
No, I think that is the limit they were allowed to drive to preserve the engine.
Oh, okay. So it's another Renault hold back issue that we were talking about earlier with the Mercedes holding back. Very interesting. Alpha Tauri then. Yuki Tsunoda, the only Red Bull powertrain driver to finish the race. This is a circuit he knows well. He scored points here last year. Is this Yuki's true speed? Are we going to see more top 10s from him?
This is Yuki's true speed.
Oh, very good. Alfa Romeo. We've already talked a lot about those. Bottas doing well. Zhou in the top 10. But Bottas, new team, new legacy. where does Bottas want to end up this year? What should he aim as a end of season goal?
I would say he should aim for somewhere around 6th, 7th in the driver standings.
Ooh, lovely. I'll do a quick follow on to that one. Do you think he can get a podium this year?
At least one.
At least one. Interesting. Okay. Williams, Alex Albon, brand new to the team this year. It was an interesting race for him, and he managed to convincingly, I'm going to say, beat Latifi. Latifi been there 3 years now, and the guy who just comes into the team immediately beats him. Should he be worried?
He shouldn't be more than worried. He should be gone.
Wow. Okay. Well, we're definitely not getting Nicholas on the show later on. Then I'll tell you that. McLaren struggles. We've said about that all the time with brake problems. How long before either Norris or Ricciardo have rumours for other teams?
I think Norris deserves other team rumours. I think Ricciardo maybe is beyond the stage to get a better team, better contract.
Ooh, lovely. And I think it's last. I'm going to be correct. I'm going to be corrected later. But last but not least, Aston Martin. Vettel back this weekend. What do we think he can do?
I think Vettel can get a top 10 finish if the Aston is as good as I think it is. And I think it's just Hülkenberg struggled, new car, didn't know what he was doing, no testing, and Stroll struggled because he's just rubbish and he's one of the worst drivers, along with Latifi.
Fantastic. In which case, Josh, I would like to thank you very much for joining me today. It has been a pleasure, as always. Of course, we have the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix this weekend. It is, well, I don't know what to say. It's very fast and again in the desert. I don't really know what to say with Saudi Arabia, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, it's a fantastic circuit, and hopefully one that we will have a completed paddock this year, because it was a little bit half built, if you remember, Josh.
Yes, it was. They delayed a lot of the sessions because they hadn't built the track yet, which was a very good finish. But I think Jeddah is completely different, and I think it will be very interesting because it needs to be more downforce. You're still going to have the hot temperatures and high speeds, less overtaking, so potentially more yellow flag safety car, virtual safety cars, where cars trying to get past have an accident. Could we see a return of Verstappen versus Hamilton controversy? Yes, I think that is very, very obvious after what the FIA have said about the Abu Dhabi. Not getting involved in that. I personally was not happy when that came out. But yeah, this weekend, completely different track, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see a completely different top four.
Interesting. In which case, Josh, I will thank you very much for your service here today, and I will salute you goodbye. I have been Connor Jackson, and this has been a production for Motorsport Radio.
This is Motorsport Radio.
1, 2, 3.
Join the conversation. Contact the show on Twitter, on Facebook, and on our website, Motorsport Radio.